Welcome, Liss'N Kristi listeners, viewers. If you're with us today, Kristi has got a story for y'all. If you've been a fan or a follower of Kristi Schiller for the entirety of her social, personal, public life, then you probably are familiar with her legacy that she hopes to leave long past her living life is Canines for Cops. Her secondary nonprofit, Canines for Kids. And she has done amazing things to take, canines and put them in departments across the country, honestly, across the globe, and give them to places that they are the most needed. And you protect over 2.5 million kids in schools a day with your foundation. And we want to give viewers kind of an inside look into the life and to the brand and to how all of this evolved and came to be what has become your legacy for the last 14 years.
Right. 14 years ago, I sat on a dozen different boards and they were all worthwhile, incredible platforms, but I didn't feel fulfilled. And I just didn't know what I was lacking, but I just knew I hadn't felt it yet.
And do you think, before you get into the story, do you think that sitting on the boards, because I think that breaks down kind of the platform that your life had evolved to that place. You were a corporate wife, you were, checking certain boxes that were expected of you. And I think that the mindset is when you reach a certain level financially, you're expected to do a certain thing in philanthropy.
Right.
Right? Like,
for those that have, they do.
Right. So you were on how many boards?
12 or 13. And, everything from the arts to hospital venues to, you name it. I chaired it or was on a board for it and gave it my all, gave it 110%, but still wasn't feeling like there was a big disconnect between raising those funds and getting to the root of whatever the problem was. And I was sitting at my house in December 2009, 2 days before Christmas, and I saw on TV that the sound was off, but I saw this officer on there, and it showed this beautiful dog, and it showed him, and then it kind of showed him crying, and I turned up the volume to see what was going on, and I caught it about 75% through with a story, and he said, well, he gave his life to protect mine. And I was like, what in the world happened? And he said, I hope that his death won't be in vain. And I just felt like this man who I didn't know was speaking to me or sending me some kind of to investigate this further. So I started getting online and trying to figure out what happened and couldn't really get the gist of the story, and started calling politicians and said, there's a dog that died and it was a working dog. It was a police dog. And I knew about law enforcement, but I had no idea the depths of, especially Houston, all the different entities. We have constables, we have sheriffs, we have marshals, we have
Rangers,
we have metro police, school police. I just thought, and if thought it,
you call 911 and someone comes to save you.
Right, whatever your area is, they ping it and whatever you need. And I thought to myself, why did that happen? In other words, I guess they'll just give him another dog. And if they have, it never dawned on me, of course, not being involved in politics, at that level or citywide or things like that. I thought, well, if they just have a purchase order, they just go get another one. And I promise you, that's what 90% of my friends thought too.
Well, probably 99% of your friends.
Right. And when I realized that he's going to have to be on desk duty, he didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
Because his partner, he doesn't have that, and he was going to be forced to stay inside and, until they could, find the funds to get another one, get it approved by commissioner's court, that it was all such a long process. Well, in the meantime, because there's one less person on the street, my taxes don't go down. You just have one less person on the street and one less dog. And so I thought, I want to give this dog anonymously because it doesn't really matter who I am. I just want to let that man know he's appreciated. And I looked at him and I thought, we're probably the same age. He had to go home to his kids and say, Black's not coming home because daddy takes him with him to work and to keep me alive. And my mind was just racing. And so
And your little girl was how old at the time?
my little girl was 4. And knew at that point, whatever I did, things that interests that I have or things that I say, these are all so monumental, a foundation to a child. That they're watching at that point, you like a hawk, everything you're doing moving forward. And so if they see that as an example of giving back, again, I sat on so many different boards. I had never started one before and certainly had never worked closely with law enforcement before.
Tell the thing about the ballerinas.
Right. I was thinking to myself, so wait, you raise all this money, and I'm sitting on the ballet board and I see that, they raise millions of dollars in one night. Nothing against the ballet. It's beautiful, and I think that everybody should experience it. But I thought, they don't spend that money to feed those girls. They give them a head of lettuce once every 3 months and go, split it amongst yourselves. You have to stay skinny. Here, y'all did really good. Here's one M&M. Work it out between yourselves. I mean, what?
So the world's not lacking for people who are willing to give.
Right.
Just
No.
what's your call and what's your cause?
No, just how do you channel that to get it to the most effective without all the red tape in between? Without, I don't really think we live in Texas, which is such a wonderful state. And if people will hook to your train if you're enthusiastic about something. And I just think that the days of having your name on the side of a building, we used to think, or when I was little growing up, those are the people that gave. You see that the big names on the side of hospitals, and other than that, you have car washes and bake sales. And if your little league team needs to go, I grew up in a small town. So that's the kind of thing that, you have little fundraisers, and then you have major gifts, which are huge corporations or CEOs or family foundations. But I thought there's got to be somewhere in between that if somebody wanted to give $20 and they knew it was going towards that dog, that they would want to do that, because that's the same dog that protects their children or protects their family when it gets called out by law enforcement. So I wanted to give a dog anonymously. I was told that I couldn't do it because it's just, and I understood it. It took me quite a good time, but I understood, because somebody will call and say, I want to give $5,000, but I only want it to go to left front Firestone tires. And you just, the administration time and all the wants and the needs would just be so much.
And most of them only have just a general fund.
Right.
It all goes into
so
one
it all
kitty
goes
pot.
into a general fund. So if they are raising money specifically for something, you can give that. But a lot of departments don't have it to where they can have foundations or separate drives for certain things. So again, it all goes into a general fund. If you give to that general fund as the donor, you don't get to decide where it goes, which is only fair. So they said, find a charity that gives canine working dogs and just donate to them in that officer's name. So they told me, they said, that department really doesn't need the money because they're really a big department. It was a constable unit, and it is probably one of the largest in Texas. I think they had like 700 in their department. But I said, wait, they don't need money? What does that mean? They said, well, and I said, Warren Buffett needs money to do what he does. That's crazy. Everybody needs support.
Right.
And so when I started looking into it further and, had a map going with thumbtacks, realizing, wow, this county in Texas has been 10 years trying to raise money for one dog. the walkathons, the bake sales, the car washes. This one over here has been 5 years. How many, or that they had just had to retire their dog because maybe it got sick or aged out, that they didn't have the funds to replace it.
And really fast, just touch on some of the things at the very beginning stages that you learned are such important reasons for departments to have working dogs. Like, what are the benefits? What are they lacking when they don't have that dog in place?
Well, besides the personal protection and going in, I mean, a dog's nose is 500,000 times stronger than a human's. Like I say, they don't care how you vote. They don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. They don't care who your daddy is. Don't care. They're there to do a job, and they get rewarded with a tennis ball. They never call to work and say, I'm hungover, or I need an extra holiday, or
My wife's divorcing me.
your wife's divorcing me, or whatever the problem is. They wake up happy every day to do their job. They just work for the love of a tennis ball. So I'm like, why don't we have more of this? And so at the time, I went and met with the sheriff in Houston. And I said, tell me about, what you have. The time they had two for a county with 5.5 million people. So and one of them had cancer, and both of them were over 8 years old. Really? And that's what's protecting us. And it's not anybody's fault, but it becomes our problem. Because wouldn't you want, as I used for a great example, I said, look, when we had the first fundraiser at my house in Houston, we just kind of did it in the backyard, and they took some pseudo drugs and hid them and was showing the crowd, how they find the dog, how they find the dope. And one of the ladies says, that's so cute. That dog does tricks. And I said immediately, go up to the microphone, and I said, let me explain. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. When you get in your beautiful Maserati, Bentley, Rolls Royce, Range Rover, fancy car, and you head out to your private plane to go to your home in Aspen for the summer, you have to go through kind of a wonky part of town to be able to get to the FBO. I said, if you have your top down or your window down and you're sitting waiting at the light, and all of a sudden somebody comes along and snatches your $500,000 necklace, and he runs off in the projects, and you're freaking out because you're on the phone and this guy's just grabbed your necklace. Now, there's an officer close by, and he has seen what happened. He honestly, it's his job to go chase that man, but he doesn't know really what he's going into. And your necklace likely is insured, that you can have a replacement probably within a week sent to you. But that's his life when he goes in there. And we certainly don't want anything bad to happen to a dog. But that dog can run 35 miles an hour. It could probably beat the bad guy to the other end before he got there. Wouldn't you want to know that that officer was going home safe to his family? And then either you get your necklace back, or, this culprit's caught. It's all because of a dog. And how many more stops or drugs or guns in schools we've removed over 300,000 handguns.
Well, I mean, the statistics of what you've done since inception speak for themselves. When you talk about proof of concept as far as a charity goes, you have every single thing that there is to back it up. And I think, especially for Canines for Cops, when you realize what's going on, and we can all talk about the war on drugs, and we can talk about guns, we can talk about all the things that we all know are relevant and causing issues for us today. We can talk about school shootings, but canines are one of the only thing that give officers probable cause to search and seizure a vehicle a home, the fact that they can alert to those scents with a nose that's 500,000 times stronger than a human's nose. We rely on that as a tool, and nothing has been replicated in a machine that can give that same alert like a canine. So one of your most prominent stories of a single stop in Texas was how much?
$130 million worth of raw fentanyl. It was enough to kill 3 times the size of Texas. It was enough to take out 90 million people.
And that was located in an automobile that was just traveling down the highway.
About 30 miles west of Houston.
And if that officer
Interstate 10.
had not had a canine with him that day, he would not have had permission to search that vehicle.
Right. It was completely a cold stop. People just don't realize we're 6 hours from the border. People just don't realize how much it's coming in. And we're basically from in Central Texas, probably located to more port towns than any place else in America.
The statistics and the facts that you have gained knowledge to over the last 14 years, I know you could write at least 2 books, right? Educating people on the things that you weren't aware of when you started all this. What do you feel like, your life has taken a little bit of a shift since you first started Canines for Cops? A big shift, we'll say it's a big shift. But what do you feel like have been the biggest hurdles as far as educating donors, educating people who want to apply for a dog, and really raising the funds to do what's necessary? Because currently, as an organization, and I work for you for Canines for Cops also, we are sitting close to 500 pending grant applications from across the country. Canines for Cops is in 38 states. That means we've granted dogs in 38 states already. The majority of those applications have come from Texas, but as the word gets out, people are branching out. People need these working dogs. So to sit on 500 pending grant applications when those canines will cost us as a foundation anywhere between $15,000 to $25,000 a dog, depending on what their purpose is, if they're single purpose, if they're dual purpose. So you do the math yourself, 15 to 25,000 times 500. What has been the hardest part about raising that money?
Is people see that maybe the dogs on TV, will get a big bust somewhere. And, we never stop getting press for our dogs. So if a department doesn't have its own PR person inside, they send it to us and we write up the press releases, send it out to the press with pictures. And people think, I just saw you got $1 million and 10 kilos of cocaine. Good for you. I think they actually think that they bring that by our office and says, here's your cut. We get none of that.
So to date, you have only been funded by
private donors.
And so I think when you break that down and you look at the big picture, yes, you have people who have single-handedly supplied, enough money to fund an entire dog. And with that, let's say, Joe Blow, my cousin up in Iowa, says, hey, you know what? I'd like to fund a dog for the school, or I'd like to fund a dog for the local police department. That's going to be $20,000, Joe. Let's say she writes that check. With that, she'll get a working report on her dog, what the dog has accomplished in its career, and kind of like a report card, right? But so many people...
You run on investment.
Right. So many people look at that and say, I could never give $20,000 to fund a whole dog. So, what's the point?
But you can give $20.
Right. The point is we have researched so many other foundations, and collectively the best way to make a larger impact as a whole is if everybody just does a little bit more.
Right. It's better that way. People are more invested. It's more of a movement,
Like the Gary Sinise Foundation gave $55 million last year.
Right.
Now, I don't know how they're
He's
going
doing
about
amazing things.
Raising that money, but what you're doing with the money raised is monumental. When we look at drug trafficking and the price of cocaine in California versus the price of cocaine in Montana versus, all over, there is basically this drug roadmap, and it shows you how the price goes up based on how many hands it's had to change.
Right.
And you realize...
It's just like the stock market.
Right. But you realize all of that's being transported across the country on the highway.
Right.
right? It has to change hands somewhere. And in order for that change hands and for that to end up in, maybe your kid's backpack, because we've seen drugs come across the
That
border in
looks like
backpacks.
Play-Doh, that looks like Frosted Flakes, and they're all tainted.
Right. And so if these things are getting passed off as unsuspecting looking items, I mean, I'm going to have Reagan throw pictures up right now of, we seized a package of Nerd Ropes, of Lay's potato chips, and there was another candy in there.
Sour Patch.
Sour Patch Kids. And then there was also a teddy bear. And all of this is also being sent through the mail.
The U.S. mail is our number one way we traffic drugs in America.
Right. And
Most
all
people
of
don't
it
know
looks
that.
unsuspecting. So if an officer's looking at it, he's not going to think twice about it. But having a canine there who's like, hey, you know what? Something's suspicious, Dad. Or Mom, whatever. This isn't okay. All of a sudden, that breaks a case wide open. I mean, there was an entire elementary school floor covered in paraphernalia that was easily disguised. And people are getting smarter. They're getting craftier. I mean, you've seen cars with people who have figured out you have to push the gas pedal 3 times.
Put the radio station to this, and then, you put something in neutral, then you hit the CD player, and then all of a sudden the front.
There's fake floors. There's fake
floors,
floorboards.
fake dashes.
I mean, and one of the things that we're really excited about, and Liss'N Kristi listeners, Canines for Cops, fans, is if you see this logo behind us, if you're watching, is we have decided to take a new approach to spreading this message about Canines for Cops, Canines for Kids, and your new initiative, Canines for Care.
Canines for Care.
Which we'll get into that in a second. But we can't get enough press.
Right.
So we're going to have to create our own. So if you're seeing this.
And listen, I know we're in an election year. No one can promise more than a politician running for office than anyone can deliver. I have never been promised so many things that, look, and I've been doing this 14 years, and I'm still waiting. Nothing happens
Well,
fast.
and I think just to touch on the misconceptions also about what people think when they go to give is they see an image of you that doesn't match the truth. And what I mean by that is you were previously married to a big oil and gas CEO. You have invested a lot of your own resources for years into this foundation. If people had had their way and things had gone just slightly off track a couple of years ago, your doors would no longer be open.
Right.
And you get to a certain place and it's like you can no longer fund this mission on your own. You can no longer run it on your own. You have 2 employees, myself and Kristen Brown, who's been with you for years. That is the only paid employees you have. You've never taken a salary from this. And at a time and place where, for those of you who don't know, who are listening or who are watching, suffered 6 strokes, multitude of seizures, your heart stopped beating, and you're still here. And you're still saying, this cannot stop because we need it now more than ever.
Right.
And so we had kind of, like when you're holding on for a hope and a prayer of like, show me that I'm on the right track and show me that I'm doing the right thing and I'm making the right strides. About 6 months ago, we got a really amazing phone call from a man who is the head of a hospital group.
Mm-hmm. One of my best friends of 20 plus years works for him. And her name is Kelly. And she called me and said, I was just with the chairman of my company in New York, and he loves what you do. Well, I get that a lot, and I appreciate that. And she said, no, he wants to talk to you. He wants to implement canines in hospitals. And so again, people don't tell me your stories because then I'll lay awake at night trying to figure out ways that we can do something to put an end to whatever the problem is. But so he his company does, Davin Healthcare, does RN staffing. And he said, I was in working with a patient one night, and he said, he was very big, and Dave's a really big guy, probably 6'4" plus. And he said, he attacked me. He was on whatever, PCP, angel dust, something like that. And he said he attacked me, and I left with a broken nose. But I still came back to work the next day, and there was nobody there to provide that protection. And it was just kind of like, well, it comes with a job. You got to watch out. What happened if I would have been a 5'4" woman?
Right.
Or, people think, oh, they're out on the streets looking for fentanyl. They're also coming into hospitals.
Right. I mean, the people who are coming into the ER rooms are usually people who need treated because, and for those of you who are listening that think, oh, well, if it's their dumb luck that they're going to take the drugs anyways and end up in the ER, then they should be there anyways. But that's not always the case. How many reports do we read all the time about somebody accidentally took something that was laced with something? They had a horrible reaction. Like
Right.
They didn't know what they were ingesting. And drugs can make you do crazy things. But we all rallied together kind of during COVID and took a step back and said, holy cow, thank you to the first responders. Thank
Right.
you to the people who keep our country going. The grocery stockers, the semi-drivers, yes, the nurses, the doctors, the people who were in there fighting that fight day and night. All the standing ovations out of the windows in New York City for the nurses and the healthcare staff that just risk their life every day. And we've gotten a little bit away from that conversation, but getting back to it, it's like those nurses and those doctors and those patient coordinators, they're still risking their life every day because the drug epidemic has gotten worse.
Right.
And so they're going and putting themselves on blast, being sometimes the first case scenario that those people who are on drugs interact with. And, also Dave informed you that he also lost a beloved family member to a fentanyl overdose.
He lost a sister. And he said, so this hits very close to home for me.
Right.
And I just broke down one day on the phone and started talking to him. And I said, look, I have this PFO, a hole in my heart. And I said, I've had strokes. And he goes, I had the exact same thing. And so it was kind of like, okay, this is some kind of divine intervention.
Right. And yes. And I think that because we just had a gala recently and they came down, we launched the news about Canines for Care. And I think some people have kind of been like, wait a second, you're adding another leg, but you're having a hard time with the grants you're already receiving. Let's break that down a little bit for the people who are curious why it's a good thing to add another leg when we're still trying to get the first two solidified.
Well, look, Canines for Cops protects anybody that has a situation or protects the officers that they're doing their job. Canines for Kids, if you have kids, if your neighbors have kids, if you have grandkids, you're going to be affected sometime while they're in school that somebody's bringing something that they shouldn't. Is it dope? Is it guns? Every child deserves to have a safe place to learn, period. And then with Canines for Care, you take it again into the hospitals where the first responders are, or maybe a child's in there trying to get an IV that, is absolutely scared to death.
Right.
And there's something traumatic going on, or, somebody fighting a nurse or something like that. The dogs can also bring a calming effect.
Right. But the hospital group itself has access to so many different fundraising platforms.
Yes.
And access to so many people that we aren't in front of. And they've basically decided to take the Canines for Care on their own, not on their own, but to help launch it in a way that expands the platform.
That we could have never had access to.
Exactly. And it gets us in front of new donors, new eyes, people who are going to feel inspired. And just like the nurses and the doctors who are taking the brunt of this abuse, we're constantly aware of what teachers are having to endure, and that thought that, we should be arming teachers, or we should, no, we should not. Should we start arming doctors? No, we need to take a step back and figure out the best way to implement protection protocols. And canines, we have seen so many different facets in how a canine can quickly, like within
De-escalate.
seconds, diffuse and de-escalate a situation that could end up catastrophic. The idea that a dog sweeping through a locker room at school might be able to pick up on gunpowder residue from a kid's coat hanging in the locker because he was, maybe he was target practicing with his dad that weekend. Maybe he was not target practicing with his dad that weekend. Maybe there's some rounds in his pocket. You just never know. But wouldn't the advantage of having that canine on campus available, and also we're asking our kids now to go to school with a fear we never had.
No, we never had.
So if I were a little girl going to school right now and I thought, you know what, I'm going to school and I don't know if somebody's going to bring a weapon to school today, but I knew my cousin in the town over was going to school every day and they had a dog at school and that dog could tell if maybe somebody was coming with a weapon. We've talked to kids in schools who will say, I'm not as scared getting up and coming to school every day because Canine Jazz is here protecting me.
Right. Or Canine Lucy. And, if their classroom does something exceptional, they get to bathe Lucy that week.
Right.
Lucy has her own page in the yearbook.
There's foundations all over the country that will train dogs for emotional support, for therapy, for recovery, for healing. It's a proven fact that a dog, even when they're doing interviews with kids that have had horrific situations, they'll sometimes put that dog in the room with a child and let the child talk to the canine in order to, there's a trust there. And it seems like the most easily accessible tool for these communities to put into place.
Well, and people look at the obvious. They go, guns or drugs. And I don't know if they expect like a brick of cocaine to come falling out. But when we talk about granules of fentanyl that have gotten, some people have ingested granules that have led to their demise. This is iPhone. This much C4 is an explosive device. This is what they use to blow up a stadium when they go to rebuild it. People just don't understand. There's so many other avenues besides just guns and drugs. And I really appreciate a lot of these moms have that run these foundations that are anti-guns. I hear what they're saying. I'm a mom. I appreciate what they're saying. I feel like get on some hill that you can die on that's more realistic. The forefathers set up our Second Amendment rights is in stone. Guns aren't going anywhere, so let's work on an alternative to make it where you have to have them under locks. There's special devices. There's arming a teacher that wasn't prepared to be armed is maybe one of the most chicken fried, lame ideas I've ever heard. Because we know as in the industry, you shouldn't take anything that's going to imbibe your ability to be coherent. 24 hours before, if you're a surgeon, if you're a pilot, if you're, a police officer, 24 hours before that you have to be at work or, fly a plane or operate on somebody, that you shouldn't take anything like that. But yet you want to give a teacher a gun and you're not telling her, don't go out with your friends the night before. No one's prepared. And these shooters in these schools have been sitting in their mother's basement or, for 6 months planning this.
Right.
And then you hand her a 38 and you want her to save the day no. And it's not going to work that way.
And honestly, I feel like because we've talked about it so much, the capabilities of these working dogs, even though it's proven, we haven't really even unlocked their full potential.
Right.
And when you realize how the SEAL teams utilize canines and what they've trained them to do, they can sometimes send these dogs in with specialized cameras equipped to them. The people watch, dog shows. They see the talent that some of them have. And, one of the other things that I think that the misconception is we get so many requests of, oh my gosh, I just had a litter of puppies. Can I donate? Oh my gosh, we just got a litter of puppies. I'd like to give you the whole litter even. That in and of itself is impossible.
Right.
Today. And I say that because we have done so much research on figuring out how we can lessen the burden of expense, right? And with that being said, there's so many government entities that use these same working dogs, like the DOJ,
Right, the DOJ, the DOD, and
TSA,
right.
like so many places that use these dogs. Where do these dogs come from?
The majority come from Europe.
So for years, the lineage,
The majority of our dogs come from
right,
Europe.
the breeding, anybody who's in the business knows that the lineage and the pedigree of these working dogs, the best ones are coming from Europe.
Right.
And
Hence the name German Shepherd, Belgian Malinois. This
Right.
is where they derive from. So they have better hips, better.
right. And so you, within the organization, have cultivated one of the probably the best ways to grant a dog. So let's say a department decides to grant a dog through you versus themselves. You have made relationships with over 14 vendors within the United States. All of those vendors procure their canines from Europe. So they have relationships with these breeders. They're getting the best stock of the working dogs, bringing them back. And these dogs are probably, 18 months old?
Yeah, and from we consider a puppy up to 2 years old.
Right.
So maybe a year old.
Right. So when you call and say, hey, I'd like to give my litter of puppies, understanding the process of how we even procure these dogs. We don't house any dogs at Canines for Cops. We don't house any dogs at
We're
Canines
kind
for
of the
kids.
Match.com, eHarmony, Airbnb. We match you up.
We rely on the best source for the breeding program of these dogs and from these vendors. Now, the vendors that you've selected, you've gone through years trying to get the
Right.
best of the best of the vendors. Vendors who will promise a 2-year working guarantee on the life of the canine. Vendors who will give officers multiple choices when selecting their dogs because sometimes the fit isn't just right.
Right.
They have to have a chemistry together. And, you also have decided, I need to collect a database of information of what these dogs do after the fact. So if there's a drug bust, if there's nefarious stuff, whatever it is, not only do you collect the data, you have the capability then for the best interest of the canine to always make the right decision.
Right.
And with that being said, let's say there's a department that received a canine through you versus one that went out and acquired one on their own. If something bad happens in that department, that canine might be stuck.
Right.
Versus if we find out something bad happened in that department, you can go in and remove the dog and place it with another handler someplace else.
And I think a lot of times that there's not smaller operations that are really good and that have a lot of knowledge, but a lot of times these officers will be so excited if they're in a small department about, we're going to get a canine. My brother-in-law's brother's brother learned how to train pit bulls in prison. I mean, something, we're going to save all this money. So they do the car wash and the bake sale and everything to get the equipment that they need. And then the dog turns on them, or it they don't know the history of the dog. It's not trained to a certain degree or to a certain standard that we meet. And then next thing you know, it's like, oh, well, that vendor went out of business and that was all he trained and that was it.
Right.
So we really protect them coming and going. And so if they, a lot of times something will happen, not a lot, but we've had it once or twice that something happens that it's not the vendor's fault. It's not, maybe a dog contract. We had one that contracted cancer in its eye or something within a few months after. And, we said, go back and get yourself a brand new dog. We'll work it out.
And for the, the dog lovers who are highly invested in that bonding, that's something that I take into high consideration because a working dog's working life is usually from about 18 months, 2 years old until maybe 11, 12's kind of pushing
Well, that's really old. I
Right.
would say usually not past 9.
Right.
We've seen it definitely. There was one that he was 14. I said, "Are you rolling him out on casters?"
Right. But out of desperation, they
Right.
worked the dog past.
It wasn't that dog wasn't ours. That was
Right.
a dog that they had, and they had applied with us to get a new one. And I'm like, "So do you have a current, canine unit?" And they said yes. And I said, "Well, how old's your dog?" And they were like, "Just turned 14." I was like, "Years old or months?"
Right. But I think that when you think about that, for me, if I were a handler and I had just spent the last, let's say, 7 years of my life forming a bond, a relationship, a commitment to an animal and a partner that I took with me every single day, and let's say something happened and I had to medically retire, but my canine was only 7 years old. If my department acquired that dog, would retire me and place my canine with a new handler. But any dog that is gifted through Canines for Cops, we are going to look at the best interest of that canine. And so if it's with us, we're going to look at that department and say, you know what? Let's get you a new dog. That dog has served its time. It's done its job.
These two have a bond.
They have a bond. And for the betterment of their sanity and their emotional well-being, we want to see that dog retire with its handler because that's what's best. And so that's another reason to grant through Canines for Cops or Canines for Kids, is because we try to look at it as a whole and put the package together and make it better for everybody. And I don't think that you can emphasize that enough, because so many people don't realize that that's really how it happens in law enforcement.
Absolutely. And, a lot of times, as I've asked myself and I've asked politicians, a lot of these veterans returning have canine experience. They don't want to come back to the U.S. and be, Jerry Jones or Mark Cuban or
collect a disability check.
Yeah, they want to still feel like they're giving back. Not that there's anything wrong with being Jerry or Mark, but the aspirations that they have are continuing to serve. So what better human being that you would want inside of a school protecting your kids with a trained dog?
Absolutely.
I can't say enough about when I get these notes from officers, sometimes 1:00 in the morning, and say, I just got this bust. Or, I always feel like you're looking, people in the South, like, look at your game cameras after they put them out during deer season. We laid out corn. Look at the monster bucks. And it's like, okay, it's Monday. Let's see what we're sending us. And the loads, we'll have Reagan pops them up. But just the fentanyl, the heroin, the cocaine. I can't even begin to, and I'm the one out there, all of a sudden, a lot, China white heroin has been coming through a lot. So I'll put a note out to the guys in that region. Hey, look at this and be careful. And they test everything, but a lot of this is, and I'll send them pictures of loads. This isn't cocaine. This is heroin.
Right.
And what they're doing now is putting air tags, the drug dealers, I'm giving away all their secrets, inside the load. So to a couple of my officers down on the border, they didn't have the budget. I sent them metal detectors.
Well, and I think that some people think, wow, this is such a government problem. Let the government fund it.
I'm listed. The government hasn't called me back. Now, they'll call me when they want stuff.
Right.
We have that kind of communication.
But this is a throwback to the Nick McKinley episode of him saying, I'm seeing all this issue with human trafficking. I'm sure there's a government entity that's in charge of this.
Yeah.
The government's tapped out. And you know what? Whether they're in on the drug trade or they're not on the drug trade, this is our country, right? And so I think that so many people think out of sight, out of mind, or it hasn't hit home or it hasn't affected me yet. But, we've been talking to people in local areas saying, you know what, right now we have a request for 10 working dogs just in the state of Wisconsin, in the state of Wisconsin. And there's somebody up there that we've tried to send a message to who really likes to give back to the community and said, we would love it if you could help us fund some of these dogs in Wisconsin because you're close to the border. A lot of drug trafficking is happening up there. And they said, well, it's not in our town. Well, right, but if you help us within your state, hopefully it can't ever get to your town, but sometimes it's not so minuscule. And I think the broader idea is we have to stop.
Well, 8 of those requests were less than an hour to that town.
Right. But it's encouraging people to see the big picture, is if, and the carryover, if we get a canine here, the town next door is probably going to want one too, because everybody, I want what the Joneses have, right?
Right.
And we've seen that in Canines for Kids. Like if a school gets a dog, the school next door might start looking at it harder or closer or think, you know what, that's a really great idea. Why don't we do that? And it's just spreading the message. But in order to spread the message and gift those dogs, we need more money.
Right.
And it's not going to come from the government, because we've been to the Capitol in Texas. We've been to the Capitol in Washington. We've sent letters. We've sent requests. We've applied for grants. I mean, we submitted what, 30?
We've been to Congress. We've been to the Supreme Court. We have been to every place, and they all just, oh my God, this is an amazing, amazing program. Let's take a photo op.
Right. Keep doing what you're doing. Great job. Yeah. Let us know how it goes next year. And to touch on that too, what I said earlier about looking at all the ways that we could save money in this, if you're somebody that's highly involved and aware of the climate globally, you should know that any working dog that is of probably quality to some degree that we have here in the United States has been procured somewhere else. So last year we took a really hard look at how do we take those genes, those genetics, develop a really solidified breeding program here in the United States, one that can support our government, one that can support our organization, one that can supply all the dogs that we're being asked for, at a more affordable price for us, build a high state-of-the-art breeding facility, do a conjunction with Texas A&M and make sure the genetics are spot on, that these dogs have the best hips, the best bones, the best whatever they need to work at capacity. But all that takes time, and all that takes people, and all that takes money. And so we're not short on ideas. We're not short on inspiration. We're not short on any of that stuff. We just need some more help.